My name is Adrienne Blackstone. I'm 31 years old, and if you think you know how family loyalty works, stay tuned. What happens when you build a $47 million empire while your own family calls you a delusional failure? When the father who mocked your dreams comes crawling back with his hand out after his own business crumbles to dust? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony wasn't lost on me as I stared at Dad's contact flashing on my phone screen at 2:47 a.m. The same man who'd told me 3 years ago that I was living in a fantasy world and would never amount to anything real was now calling at nearly 3 in the morning. I let it ring, then ring again. By the 5th call, I finally answered. "Adrienne, sweetheart, I know it's late, but we need to talk." His voice was different, strained, almost desperate. Gone was the condescending tone that had haunted my childhood dinners in our modest home in Millbrook Heights. This wasn't the voice of the man who'd built Riverside Construction from nothing and reminded everyone in Clearwater Valley about it at least twice a week. "About what, Dad?" I kept my voice neutral, professional. The same tone I used in boardroom meetings when closing deals that were worth more than his entire annual revenue. "The business, it's in trouble. Real trouble. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I need your help. Your mother and I, we're facing bankruptcy. I heard about your company, Nexus Digital Solutions, and how well you're doing. Maybe we could—" I hung up. Not out of cruelty, but out of sheer disbelief. This was the same man who'd laughed, actually laughed, when I told him I was quitting my accounting job at Thornfield and Associates to start my own digital marketing agency. Marketing on the internet? He'd scoffed, fork halfway to his mouth during what would be our last family dinner for over 2 years. "That's not a real business, Adrienne. That's a hobby for people who can't handle real work." My younger brother Garrett had snickered into his mashed potatoes. Mom had just shaken her head like I was announcing I'd joined the circus. "Your father built a real company with his bare hands," she'd said, gesturing toward Dad with obvious pride. "Construction, real estate development, that's how you build generational wealth, not by playing on computers." Playing on computers. That's what they called the 80-hour weeks I'd been putting in, teaching myself everything from SEO algorithms to conversion rate optimization. That's what they called the $15,000 I'd scraped together from my savings. Money that represented every penny I'd saved from 3 years of 14-hour days at the accounting firm, every skipped vacation, every no to friends who wanted to grab expensive dinners. I remember driving home from that dinner, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The radio was playing some upbeat pop song, but all I could hear was their laughter echoing in my head. Their dismissal wasn't just about my business idea, it was about me. In their eyes, I was the daughter who'd never quite measured up to Dad's legacy, never quite grasped what real success looked like. See, in the Blackstone family hierarchy, Dad was the unquestioned king, Richard Blackstone, owner of Riverside Construction, the man who'd built half the commercial buildings in Clearwater Valley. He'd started with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox back in 1987, and by the time I was born, he was already a local legend. The guy who employed 30 people, whose company logo was painted on trucks you'd see all over 3 counties. Mom, Patricia, had always been his devoted queen, handling the books and managing the office with militant efficiency. She turned Riverside into a well-oiled machine, tracking every penny, scheduling every job, making sure Dad's vision became profitable reality. Then there was Garrett, the crown prince. Fresh out of college with a business degree from Pinnacle University, he'd waltzed right into a management position at Riverside. Dad's succession plan was obvious. Garrett would inherit the kingdom, continue the Blackstone construction dynasty, maybe even expand into the neighboring counties. And me? I was the spare part. The daughter who was good with numbers, hence the accounting degree Dad had insisted on, but who clearly didn't have the vision or backbone to run anything significant. Adrienne has always been the cautious one, Dad would tell people at local Chamber of Commerce events. Great with details, but not really a big picture thinker like Garrett. So when I announced I was leaving my stable, respectable accounting job to start my own digital marketing agency, it wasn't just career suicide in their eyes, it was proof that I'd finally lost touch with reality completely. The thing is, they weren't entirely wrong to be skeptical. In 2019, when I started Nexus Digital Solutions in the spare bedroom of my tiny apartment on Maple Grove Avenue, I had exactly one client, a local bakery called Sweet Dreams, whose owner, Mrs. Chen, was desperate enough to try anything to save her failing business. She paid me $500 a month to manage her social media and try to get more customers through the door. Within 6 months, Sweet Dreams went from struggling to stay open to having lines out the door every weekend. Mrs. Chen started referring me to other small businesses in downtown Willowbrook, a boutique clothing store, a family restaurant, a fitness studio that was about to close. One by one, I helped them transform their digital presence. I didn't just manage their social media. I redesigned their entire customer acquisition strategies, built them websites that actually converted visitors into buyers, created automated marketing systems that worked while they slept. But to my family, I was still just playing on computers. They had no idea that while they were having their weekly Sunday dinners, discussing Garrett's latest construction project and Dad's plans to bid on the new hospital complex, I was quietly building something that would eventually dwarf everything they'd ever accomplished. They had no idea that the daughter they'd written off as a dreamer was about to prove that sometimes the biggest dreamers build the most solid empires. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 years earlier, the moment that changed everything happened at Garrett's engagement party. The Riverside Country Club was packed with Clearwater Valley's elite. Contractors, real estate developers, city council members, and every important business owner Dad had ever worked with. The kind of event where handshakes sealed million-dollar deals and family legacies were celebrated. I'd driven up from Willowbrook in my modest Honda Civic, feeling underdressed despite wearing my best business suit. The parking lot was filled with luxury trucks, Mercedes sedans, and BMWs, the kind of vehicles that screamed real success in Dad's world. Inside, Garrett was holding court near the bar, his fiancée Melissa clinging to his arm as he regaled a circle of admirers with stories about the upcoming Winchester Mall renovation project. Dad stood beside him, chest puffed out with pride, occasionally jumping in to add details about square footage and profit margins. "There's my other daughter," Dad's voice boomed across the room as he spotted me approaching. His smile was wide, but something in his tone made my stomach clench. "Everyone, this is Adrienne. She's got her own little business now." Little business. The words hit like a slap, but I forced a smile and extended my hand to the group of men surrounding them. These were the titans of Clearwater Valley's construction and development scene, men who built shopping centers and office complexes, who employed hundreds of people. "What kind of business?" asked Harold Mitchum, owner of Pinnacle Development, one of Dad's biggest competitors and sometime collaborators. "Digital marketing," I said, trying to inject confidence into my voice. "I help businesses optimize their online presence, increase customer acquisition through targeted campaigns, and, oh, like Facebook stuff," Garrett interrupted with a chuckle. "She posts pictures and writes little captions for companies." The group chuckled politely. I felt my cheeks burn, but pressed on. "It's actually much more complex than that. I build comprehensive digital strategies that integrate—" "How much money are you making with this Facebook business?" Harold asked, the skepticism clear in his voice. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating for months. In the past year, Nexus Digital Solutions had grown from that single bakery client to managing campaigns for 43 businesses across 3 counties. My monthly revenue had hit $47,000, and I was on track to break 6 figures by year end. "I'm averaging about $47,000 a month right now," I said quietly. The conversation stopped. Completely. Harold's eyebrows shot up. Even Garrett's smirk faltered for a second. Dad laughed, not a chuckle or a polite laugh, but a full-throated, head-thrown-back laugh that made several nearby conversations pause. $47,000 a month? He wiped his eyes dramatically. Adrienne, honey, I know you want to impress people, but you don't have to make up numbers. There's no shame in having a small side business. The blood drained from my face. Dad, I'm not making it up. I can show you the... Sweetheart, Mom appeared at my elbow, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe we shouldn't discuss business numbers at Garrett's party. You know how you sometimes get your numbers mixed up. Get my numbers mixed up? I was a certified public accountant. I'd managed books for companies 10 times larger than Riverside Construction. But in that moment, standing in front of Clearwater Valley's business elite, my own parents were essentially calling me a liar and an incompetent. Garrett jumped back in, clearly enjoying the spotlight. Look, it's great that Adrienne's trying something new, but let's be realistic. Dad built Riverside from nothing. Real trucks, real workers, real buildings that'll be standing for 50 years. That's generational wealth, not whatever this internet thing is. The group nodded approvingly. Harold clapped Dad on the shoulder. Richard, you should be proud. Building a real company that employs real people, that's what this valley needs. Not more kids staring at computer screens. Exactly, Dad said, his chest swelling again. Garrett understands what real business looks like. Brick and mortar, steel and concrete, things you can touch, things that matter. He's going to take Riverside to the next level. Maybe even franchise it, expand into the eastern counties. I stood there, invisible again. The conversation had moved on to Garrett's plans for expansion, his ideas for modernizing Riverside's equipment fleet, his vision for making the company a regional powerhouse. Every few sentences, someone would compliment Dad on raising such a smart, ambitious son. You've got quite the legacy building there, Richard. That boy is going to make you proud. He already does, Dad replied, putting his arm around Garrett's shoulders. Some kids get it, some don't. Garrett's got the vision and the backbone for real leadership. I excused myself to the bathroom, where I stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror and tried to process what had just happened. My own father had publicly humiliated me, dismissed my actual success as fantasy, and then praised my brother for achievements that existed only in potential. But it wasn't just the dismissal that shattered something inside me. It was the deliberate nature of it. Dad hadn't just misunderstood my business, he'd actively chosen to discredit it in front of the most influential people in our community. He'd picked Garrett's moment of celebration to make sure everyone knew which child was worth believing in. When I returned to the party, I heard Dad's voice carrying across the room. The biggest problem with young people today is they think money just appears on computers. Real wealth comes from real work. I didn't say goodbye. I walked straight to my car, drove home to my apartment, and made a decision that would change everything. If my family wanted to see real wealth, I'd show them what real wealth looked like. And when their real business eventually crumbled under the weight of their arrogance and outdated thinking, I'd be waiting with my computer-generated empire to remind them exactly who they'd chosen to underestimate. That night, I wrote my first business plan for national expansion. Not because I was angry, though I was, but because I was finally completely crystal clear about who I was building this empire for. Myself, and no one else. The humiliation at Garrett's party wasn't just painful. It was the culmination of 28 years of being the invisible daughter in the Blackstone family dynasty. To understand why that moment cut so deep, you need to know the real story of how I built Nexus Digital Solutions while my family built their construction empire on a foundation of borrowed time and bad decisions. It started when I was 12 years old, sitting in Dad's cluttered office at Riverside Construction after school. While other kids played video games or watched cartoons, I was learning to read profit and loss statements, invoice schedules, and cash flow projections. Not because Dad was teaching me the family business. He was grooming Garrett for that, even though my brother was only 9 and more interested in building Lego castles than understanding construction contracts. No, I was there because someone had to help Mom with the books, and Garrett was too young for such complicated work. What Dad didn't realize was that I wasn't just helping, I was memorizing every financial detail of his operation. By the time I turned 16, I knew Riverside Construction's numbers better than anyone except Mom, and probably better than Dad himself. The company looked impressive from the outside. 32 employees, 12 work trucks with the Riverside logo emblazoned on the sides, and a reputation for quality work throughout Clearwater Valley. Dad loved to boast about landing the contract for the Millbrook Heights shopping center, or the time Pinnacle Development specifically requested Riverside for their luxury apartment complex. But the numbers told a different story. Riverside operated on razor-thin margins, often borrowing against future contracts to pay current expenses. Dad had a habit of underbidding jobs to win them, then hoping to make up the difference through change orders and overtime charges. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. I watched him take on the Westside Medical Plaza project for $1.8 million, when his actual costs would be closer to $2.1 million. When I pointed this out during one of our after-school number-crunching sessions, Dad waved me off. That's the difference between dreamers and doers, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to take risks to build something real. Meanwhile, I was building something entirely different in my bedroom. While Dad stressed about material costs and labor disputes, I was teaching myself HTML, CSS, and basic graphic design. While he complained about customers who were slow to pay their invoices, I was reading about conversion rate optimization and customer retention strategies. My first real taste of business success came during junior year of high school. Our neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, owned a small catering business called Delicious Moments that was struggling to find clients beyond word-of-mouth referrals. She mentioned this during a backyard barbecue, and I offered to build her a website for free just to practice my skills. Within 2 weeks, I'd created a professional site showcasing her work, integrated an online booking system, and set up social media accounts that highlighted her best dishes. By the end of the month, she'd booked 6 new events directly through the website. By Christmas, she was making enough to hire her first assistant. "Adrienne, you're a miracle worker," she told me while paying my $200 fee for ongoing maintenance, money I planned to put toward textbooks. "I've never had this many bookings. You should do this for other people." I mentioned this to Dad during dinner, excited to share how I'd helped someone's business grow by over 300% in just 4 months. His response was, "That's nice, honey, but don't let that distract you from your real studies. You'll need that accounting degree to help run Riverside someday." Run Riverside. Not own it. Garrett would inherit that privilege. Just help run it, the way Mom had been helping for 25 years. Be the supportive female presence who handled the details while the men made the big decisions.
But something had shifted inside me. Mrs. Rodriguez's success wasn't luck or coincidence. I'd identified her target market, created compelling messaging, and built systems that turned website visitors into paying customers. This wasn't just playing on computers. This was strategic business development that produced measurable results. During my senior year, while Garrett was deciding between business schools and Dad was pushing him toward Pinnacle University's construction management program, I was quietly building a portfolio of local small business clients. The flower shop on Main Street, a family law practice that needed more divorce clients, a fitness trainer who wanted to expand beyond the local gym. Each project taught me something new about digital marketing psychology, customer behavior, and the gaps between what business owners thought they needed and what actually drove revenue growth. More importantly, each success gave me confidence that this wasn't just a hobby. It was a skill set that could transform struggling businesses into thriving ones. By the time I graduated high school, I was managing digital marketing for 8 local businesses and earning about $1,500 per month. Not life-changing money, but enough to pay for my car insurance and save toward college expenses. Dad was proud of my little job, but made it clear that this was temporary income until I got serious about my education and eventually my role in the family business. College at Clearwater State University reinforced my accounting skills while I continued growing my client base on the side. While my classmates studied for exams or went to parties, I was learning Google Analytics, Facebook advertising algorithms, and email marketing automation. While they stressed about landing internships at local accounting firms, I was turning away potential clients because I didn't have enough hours in the week. The real breakthrough came during my sophomore year when I landed Thompson and Associates, a regional accounting firm that wanted to expand their client base beyond Clearwater Valley. Within 6 months, I'd tripled their qualified leads and helped them open a second location in Riverside County. The $3,000 monthly retainer was more than some graduates were making at their first jobs. But to my family, this was still just my computer hobby that helped pay for textbooks and gas money. Dad would occasionally mention my little business to his construction buddies, usually in the context of how kids these days could make a few bucks doing anything. The implication was always clear. Cute side hustle, but not real work, like swinging hammers and pouring concrete. Meanwhile, Riverside Construction was hemorrhaging money on projects that Dad had underbid, labor costs that kept rising, and equipment repairs that somehow always cost twice the estimate. I could see the stress lines deepening around Dad's eyes, watched him work longer hours for shrinking profit margins, noticed how Mom's cheerful demeanor was becoming more forced during family dinners. By my senior year, I was managing digital marketing campaigns for 43 businesses across 3 counties and pulling in almost $50,000 per month in revenue. I'd hired 2 part-time assistants and was turning away clients because I simply didn't have capacity for more work. My computer hobby was generating more monthly income than Riverside Construction's best quarters. But I kept this information to myself, partly because I knew they wouldn't believe it, and partly because I was starting to understand something important about family dynamics. Success that threatened their worldview would never be celebrated. It would be explained away, minimized, or flat out denied. So, when Garrett's engagement party arrived and I finally decided to share my real numbers, I wasn't prepared for the level of public humiliation that followed. I thought maybe evidence of my success would earn the respect that my years of dedication had never achieved. Instead, I learned that some families would rather believe their successful child is a liar than admit they'd been wrong about what constitutes real business all along. The destruction of my reputation began exactly 18 hours after Garrett's engagement party. By Monday morning, the entire Clearwater Valley business community had heard one version of what happened at the Riverside Country Club, and it wasn't mine. I discovered this when my longtime client, Margaret Hoffman, who owned Hillside Boutique, called with an awkward question that made my stomach drop. "Adrienne, honey, I heard something strange at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast this morning. Someone said you've been exaggerating your business success? I defended you, of course, but I thought you should know people are talking." People are talking. 4 words that can destroy years of credibility in a small business community where reputation is everything. I asked Margaret exactly what she'd heard, and her hesitation spoke volumes before she even answered. "Well, Harold Mitchum mentioned that Richard Blackstone's daughter has been claiming she makes more money than established construction companies, and that Richard had to gently correct some misunderstandings about her little internet business at a family gathering." Gently correct. My father had humiliated me in front of 20 of the Valley's most influential business owners, but somehow he was now the understanding parent who'd tried to spare his delusional daughter from embarrassment. By Tuesday, the story had evolved. Linda Morrison from Clearwater First Bank called to check in about my business accounts. During our conversation, she casually mentioned that she'd heard I might be struggling with some financial reality issues and wanted to make sure I wasn't overextending myself with unrealistic projections. Financial reality issues, code for your family thinks you're a liar who can't tell the difference between fantasy and actual revenue. The most devastating call came Wednesday morning from David Brennan, owner of Pinnacle Athletic Center, one of my highest-paying clients at $4,500 per month. His voice was professional but distant as he explained that he'd decided to take his marketing in a different direction.
When I pressed for specifics, he finally admitted the truth. "Look, Adrienne, I heard some concerning things about your business practices at the Rotary meeting yesterday.
People are saying you've been making inflated claims about your success, and frankly, that makes me question whether I can trust your reporting on our campaign results. Inflated claims. My own family had turned my actual success into evidence of dishonesty, and now clients who'd seen real results from my work were questioning whether those results were even legitimate. I hung up and immediately pulled David's account performance data. Over the past 8 months, I had increased Pinnacle Athletics membership signups by 340%, reduced their cost per acquisition from $89 to $23, and generated over $180,000 in new revenue for his business. The numbers were documented, verified, and undeniable. But numbers don't matter when people have already decided you're a liar. By Thursday, I'd lost 2 more clients and had 3 others request detailed verification of their campaign performance, something they'd never questioned before. The doubt was spreading like a virus through Clearwater Valley's tight-knit business community, and patient zero was my own family. The worst part wasn't the lost revenue, though that stung. It was discovering how the narrative was being shaped and who was driving it. During a particularly painful conversation with Janet Carlisle from Valley Real Estate, I learned that Garrett had been playing a starring role in demolishing my credibility. "Your brother seems like such a sensible young man," Janet said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He explained how worried the family is about you, how you've been under a lot of stress lately and maybe aren't thinking clearly about business matters. He said they're hoping you'll get back to accounting work where you can use your real skills." Worried about me, under stress, not thinking clearly. Garrett had transformed my business success into symptoms of a mental breakdown, painting himself as the concerned brother who just wanted his sister to accept reality. But Garrett's campaign was surgical compared to Mom's approach. While he positioned himself as the worried family member, Mom was systematically destroying my credibility with the Women's Business Network in Clearwater Valley, a group where I'd been slowly building relationships and credibility for over 2 years. I discovered this during the monthly Women Entrepreneurs Breakfast at the Willowbrook Cafe, a gathering I'd attended religiously since graduating college. The moment I walked in, conversations died. Eyes avoided mine. Linda Patterson, who'd been considering hiring me for her catering company's rebranding, suddenly found urgent business elsewhere in the restaurant. Finally, Rebecca Martinez from Clearwater Marketing Solutions, my biggest local competitor, approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Adrienne, we missed you at book club last week. Patricia was telling us about your creative phase. She's so supportive, helping you transition back to accounting work before things get too out of hand." Creative phase. Mom had been at book club, a gathering of successful businesswomen, reframing my digital marketing agency as a delusional episode that needed gentle family intervention. "She showed us some of your client materials," Rebecca continued, "and while the work looks competent, we all agreed that claiming those kinds of revenue numbers, well, it's concerning when someone loses touch with realistic business projections." The room felt like it was tilting. Mom hadn't just been talking about me, she'd been sharing confidential client information to prove that my success claims were impossible. She'd violated my business privacy to support the family narrative that I was mentally unstable. But the final twist of the knife came from an unexpected source. My cousin Angela, who worked as a loan officer at Riverside County Credit Union. She called Thursday evening with information that made my blood run cold. "Adrienne, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but your dad came in yesterday asking about business loan fraud and how banks verify income claims on credit applications. He seemed really concerned that someone in his family might be misrepresenting their financial situation." Business loan fraud. Dad wasn't just discrediting my reputation, he was laying groundwork to suggest I might be committing actual crimes by claiming income I didn't have. He also asked about the legal implications if someone was using false income statements to secure business credit. Angela told him that would be serious, but that banks do their own verification. Why would he... Oh...
The realization hit her mid-sentence. Adrienne, please tell me you haven't been inflating your numbers. Even my own cousin, who'd known me my entire life, was now questioning whether I was capable of financial fraud. By Friday, the picture was complete. My family hadn't just dismissed my success, they had orchestrated a comprehensive campaign to rewrite reality itself. Dad positioned himself as the concerned father protecting the community from his daughter's delusions. Garrett played the worried brother trying to help his stressed sister accept reality. Mom took on the patient mother guiding her confused daughter back to suitable work. Together, they'd created a narrative so compelling that people who'd witnessed my actual business results were now questioning their own observations. They'd turned my success into evidence of my failure, my confidence into proof of my instability, and my ambition into symptoms of a breakdown. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that every client conversation, every lost contract, and every piece of character assassination was being carefully documented. While they were destroying the reputation of small-town Adrienne, who ran a modest digital marketing agency, they had no idea that they were actually attacking someone who was about to become too big for their small-town lies to contain.
The real Adrienne Blackstone wasn't just managing local businesses anymore. She was building something that would soon make their construction empire look like a child's sandbox project. And when that truth finally emerged, their carefully crafted narrative would crumble faster than a building with a faulty foundation. The character assassination campaign my family had launched was devastating, but it also crystallized something important in my mind. If I was going to fight back, I couldn't do it with emotions or explanations. I needed to do it with evidence so overwhelming that even the most devoted believers in their narrative would have to face reality. That Friday night, after losing my fourth client in 3 days, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad and started what I would later call Project Phoenix. Not because I was rising from ashes, but because I was about to burn down their lies with the fire of absolute truth. The first step was documenting everything they'd destroyed. I created a spreadsheet listing every client I'd lost, every damaged relationship, every conversation where someone had questioned my integrity based on my family's campaign. David Brennan at Pinnacle Athletic, Linda Patterson's catering company, Margaret Hoffman's boutique, where I'd had to provide additional verification of results that had never been questioned before. But this wasn't about playing victim. It was about establishing the scope of damage so I could calculate exactly what their lies had cost me. Lost revenue, $18,400 per month and climbing. Damaged relationships, 12 business connections that had taken years to build. Reputation impact, immeasurable, but I'd find a way to measure it. Next, I began assembling what I called my truth arsenal. Every piece of documentation that proved not only my business success, but the depth of their financial struggles they'd been hiding while attacking my credibility. I started with my own company's financials, bank statements showing monthly deposits that dwarfed most local businesses, client contracts with specific performance metrics and payment schedules, screenshots of campaign results with timestamps and verified analytics data, tax returns showing income that put me in the top 15% of earners in Clearwater Valley. But the real revelation came when I decided to dig deeper into Riverside Construction's actual financial situation. Remember, I'd been helping with their books since I was 12. I knew their accounting system, their banking relationships, their typical cash flow patterns. What I discovered when I started making strategic inquiries made their attack on my credibility even more obscene. Through my contact at Clearwater First Bank, the same Linda Morrison who'd called to check on my financial reality issues, I learned that Riverside Construction had missed 2 equipment loan payments in the past 4 months. When I mentioned I was considering investing in local businesses and wondered about construction companies as potential partnerships, she inadvertently revealed that Riverside's line of credit had been reduced from $500,000 to $200,000 due to inconsistent cash flow patterns. My family was attacking my financial credibility while their own business was literally on the verge of bankruptcy.
But I needed more than insider banking information. I needed public records that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. So I spent an entire weekend at the Clearwater County Courthouse pulling every document I could find related to Riverside Construction's business activities over the past 2 years. What I found was breathtaking in its scope. 3 mechanics liens against Riverside for unpaid subcontractor fees totaling $47,000. 2 lawsuits from suppliers demanding payment for delivered materials. A judgment against the company for $23,000 in unpaid overtime wages. Court documents showing that Dad had personally guaranteed most of Riverside's debts, putting their house and personal assets at risk. The Westside Medical Plaza project that Dad had been so proud of winning, the one where I'd warned him about underbidding, court records showed he was currently being sued by the property owners for $180,000 in cost overruns and delayed completion penalties. While my family was telling everyone I was delusional about my business success, their real business was hemorrhaging money and facing potential bankruptcy. But I needed more than insider banking information. I needed public records that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. So I spent an entire weekend at the Clearwater County Courthouse pulling every document I could find related to Riverside Construction's business activities over the past 2 years. What I found was breathtaking in its scope. 3 mechanics liens against Riverside for unpaid subcontractor fees totaling $47,000. 2 lawsuits from suppliers demanding payment for delivered materials. A judgment against the company for $23,000 in unpaid overtime wages. Court documents showing that Dad had personally guaranteed most of Riverside's debts, putting their house and personal assets at risk. The Westside Medical Plaza project that Dad had been so proud of winning, the one where I had warned him about underbidding, court records showed he was currently being sued by the property owners for $180,000 in cost overruns and delayed completion penalties. While my family was telling everyone I was delusional about my business success, their real business was hemorrhaging money and facing potential bankruptcy. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. Garrett himself, my brother, who had been positioning himself as the concerned family member trying to help his mentally unstable sister, had been making some very interesting financial moves that suggested he knew exactly how precarious Riverside's situation really was. Through property records, I discovered that Garrett had quietly purchased a small office building in downtown Willowbrook 3 months ago, right around the time Dad started missing loan payments. He paid cash, $340,000. For someone making $78,000 per year managing construction projects, that was an impossible purchase unless he had access to funds he wasn't reporting. I dug deeper. Business registration records showed that Garrett had filed paperwork to establish Blackstone Development LLC 6 weeks before his engagement party, the same event where he'd helped Dad publicly humiliate me. The business was described as Construction and Project Management Services, with Garrett listed as the sole owner. My brother wasn't just preparing to inherit Dad's failing business, he was preparing to abandon it. He was using insider knowledge of Riverside's financial problems to position himself as the successor who would build something new from the ashes, probably poaching Dad's best clients and employees in the process. The pattern became clear when I cross-referenced Riverside's current projects with the client contact information I remembered from my years helping with the books. In the past 2 months, 3 of Dad's biggest clients had suddenly shifted their ongoing projects to independent contractors rather than renewing with Riverside. All 3 of those contractors were people who had previously worked for Dad and were now mysteriously affiliated with Garrett's new company.
Garrett wasn't worried about his mentally unstable sister. He was systematically dismantling Dad's business while using me as a distraction to keep attention off his activities. But the investigation phase wasn't just about gathering evidence of their failures. I also needed to document the full scope of my own success in ways that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. I compiled third-party verification of every major claim I'd made about my business. Independent audited statements showing Nexus Digital Solutions revenue growth from $6,000 in monthly billings during my first year to $52,000 per month by the time of Garrett's engagement party. Letters from satisfied clients detailing specific results I'd achieved for their businesses. Screenshots of industry recognition, including being named Rising Digital Marketer of the Year by the Regional Small Business Association. Most importantly, I gathered evidence of the national expansion I'd been quietly building while my family was focused on their local construction empire. Contracts with businesses in 12 states, partnership agreements with 3 national brands seeking digital marketing services, a licensing deal with a software company that wanted to white label my customer acquisition system. The business they'd dismissed as a little internet hobby was actually generating revenue in markets they'd never even considered entering. While they were fighting over construction contracts in Clearwater Valley, I was building systems that worked for businesses from Seattle to Miami. By the end of my investigation, I had assembled what amounted to a comprehensive business intelligence report on both their failures and my success. But this wasn't going to be a simple document dump or an emotional confrontation where I waved papers and demanded apologies. If my family wanted to play the credibility game, I was going to show them what happened when someone with actual business intelligence decided to play for keeps. They'd spent weeks destroying my reputation with lies and innuendo. Now it was time for them to experience what the truth could do to people who'd built their entire narrative on a foundation of denial and deception. The investigation phase was complete. The next phase would be implementation, and I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, nobody in Clearwater Valley would ever question which Blackstone really understood how to build an empire. Armed with my arsenal of evidence, I made a decision that would either vindicate me completely or destroy what remained of my relationship with my family forever. I was going to present the truth directly to the 3 people who'd orchestrated my character assassination, starting with the one who'd benefit most from hearing it, Dad. I called him on a Tuesday morning, keeping my voice neutral and professional. Dad, I think we need to talk about what happened at Garrett's party and some things that have been said about my business since then. Can we meet for coffee? His response was immediate and defensive. Adrienne, if this is about your exaggerated income claims, I think we've covered that topic. Your mother and I are just trying to help you get back to reality before you embarrass yourself further. Exaggerated income claims. Even in private conversation, he was maintaining the narrative that I was delusional. Actually, Dad, I have some information I think you'll find very interesting about both my business and yours. How about Thursday at 2 p.m. at the Riverside Cafe? This concerns the future of our family's financial situation. Something in my tone must have registered because, after a long pause, he agreed. Thursday arrived with unexpected drama. I'd prepared a single manila folder containing just the first layer of evidence, enough to prove my claims weren't exaggerated, but not enough to reveal everything I knew about Riverside's situation. I wanted to see how he'd react to undeniable proof before deciding how much truth to unleash. Dad arrived 15 minutes late, already agitated. He'd brought backup. Mom sat beside him, her expression a mixture of disappointment and determination. Clearly, they'd decided this was an intervention, not a business discussion. Adrienne, your father and I have been talking, and we think you need professional help. This obsession with proving your business success is becoming unhealthy. Maybe Dr. Peterson could... I slid the first document across the table. A certified bank statement showing my business account balance, $127,000. The previous month's deposits totaled $54,300. The conversation stopped. Dad's eyes locked on the numbers, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that looked like fear. This has to be a mistake, he stammered. Banks don't make errors like this, but... I placed the second document on top of the first. A letter from Goldman Sachs Business Banking congratulating Nexus Digital Solutions on qualifying for their Platinum Business Services tier, reserved for companies with monthly revenue exceeding $50,000. Mom leaned forward, studying the letterhead like it might be counterfeit. Adrienne, how did you get access to fake bank documents? This is exactly the kind of behavior that worries us. Fake bank documents. Even when presented with official verification from one of the world's most prestigious banks, they chose to believe I was committing fraud rather than accept that I'd been successful. I laid out the third piece of evidence, a contract with Meridian Industries, a Fortune 500 company, hiring Nexus Digital Solutions to manage digital marketing for their Pacific Northwest division. The contract value was $180,000 over 6 months.
Dad's hands were shaking as he read the contract details. Fortune 500 companies don't hire small operations like this. There must be some explanation. The explanation is simple, I said quietly. I built a business that's successful enough to attract national clients while you've been telling everyone I'm delusional. But Dad, that's not why I asked you here. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a second folder, this one considerably thicker. I asked you here because I think you should know that while you've been destroying my reputation over financial matters, your own company is facing bankruptcy. The color drained from his face. Mom's confident expression crumbled into something approaching panic. I opened the folder to reveal the mechanics liens, the supplier lawsuits, the missed loan payments, the judgment for unpaid wages. Every document was marked with official court stamps and filing dates. Every piece of evidence was public record that anyone could verify. 3 mechanics liens totaling $47,000, I read aloud. 2 active lawsuits from suppliers demanding $31,000 in unpaid invoices, a court judgment for $23,000 in overtime wages you failed to pay your employees, and most interesting of all, a lawsuit from Westside Medical Plaza seeking $180,000 in damages for cost overruns and construction delays. Dad's breathing had become shallow. Mom was staring at the documents like they were written in a foreign language. Where did you get these? Dad whispered. Public records, Dad. The same place any potential business partner would look if they wanted to verify whether Riverside Construction was a stable investment. The same place your competitors probably look when they're bidding against you on projects. I placed the final document on the pile, a notice from Clearwater First Bank reducing Riverside's line of credit from $500,000 to $200,000 due to inconsistent cash flow and elevated risk factors. So, while you've been telling the entire business community that I'm financially delusional, your company has been hemorrhaging money and facing potential bankruptcy. While you've been questioning my credibility, your own credibility with suppliers and banks has been evaporating. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. Dad was staring at his hands, Mom was looking between the documents and his face with growing horror. Finally, Dad spoke, his voice barely audible. How long have you known? I've known Riverside was struggling for months. I tried to help by suggesting better project pricing strategies, remember? You told me I didn't understand real business. But I only discovered the full extent of your financial problems after you decided to publicly humiliate me. Mom finally found her voice, but it came out as an accusation. You've been spying on us, investigating your own family like we're criminals? I've been protecting myself, I replied. When your own family launches a campaign to destroy your professional reputation, you document everything. When they question your financial credibility while hiding their own financial crisis, you gather evidence. When they paint you as mentally unstable for claiming success they refuse to acknowledge, you build a case that even they can't dismiss. Dad looked up, his eyes hollow. What do you want, Adrienne? Money? Are you here to gloat? To demand we publicly apologize? The question revealed everything I needed to know about how they saw this situation. Even confronted with undeniable evidence of their deception and their failures, Dad's first assumption was that I was there to exploit their vulnerability or extract some kind of payment. I don't want your money, Dad. Your company doesn't have any money to give. What I want is for you to understand that the daughter you've been calling delusional and financially incompetent is actually the only member of this family who knows how to build a sustainable business. I stood up and gathered my documents. I also want you to understand that while you've been spending your energy destroying my reputation, you should have been spending it saving your company. Because based on these numbers, you have about 6 months before Riverside Construction collapses completely. As I walked toward the door, Dad called out desperately, "Adrienne, wait! If what you're saying is true, if your business is really doing this well, maybe we could work together. Maybe you could help Riverside with some kind of digital marketing strategy." I turned back to face them both. Dad looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, his construction empire crumbling around him, while his daughter's computer hobby threatened to eclipse everything he'd built. Mom was staring at the bank statements like they might change if she looked hard enough. "Dad," I said softly, 6 months ago, that conversation might have been possible. But that was before you decided to handle your financial insecurity by attacking mine. That was before you chose to protect your ego by destroying my credibility. I walked out of the cafe knowing that I just detonated the first explosive in what would become a complete demolition of their carefully constructed lies. But what I didn't know was that Dad and Mom wouldn't retreat and regroup. They would escalate and attack. The real war was just beginning. The escalation I'd anticipated from my parents came swiftly, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of retreating after being confronted with evidence, they doubled down with a strategy so bold and desperate that it forced my hand completely. 3 days after our confrontation at Riverside Cafe, I received a call from Dr. Sarah Peterson, a family therapist in Clearwater Valley. Her voice was professional but concerned as she explained that my parents had contacted her about scheduling a family intervention for what they described as my escalating business delusions and potential fraud activities.
"Miss Blackstone," she said carefully, "your parents are very worried about you. They've provided some concerning information about fabricated financial documents and obsessive behavior regarding family business matters. They're hoping we can arrange a session to discuss healthier ways to handle career disappointment." Career disappointment. My parents had contacted a licensed therapist and convinced her that my business success was actually a mental health crisis requiring professional intervention. "Dr. Peterson," I said, keeping my voice steady, "I appreciate your concern, but I think there may be some misinformation involved here. Would you be willing to review some documentation about my actual business performance before we schedule anything?" Her hesitation told me everything. "Well, your parents did mention that you might try to present falsified documents to support your claims. They're quite concerned about the extent of the fabrication." That evening, I made a decision that would change everything. If my family wanted to make this a public matter by involving mental health professionals and continuing their character assassination campaign, then the public would get to see the complete truth about both their lies and their failures. I started with the Regional Business Journal, Clearwater Valley's primary publication for local commerce news. The editor, Michael Torres, had been trying to interview me for months about Nexus Digital Solutions' rapid growth, but I'd always declined, preferring to keep a low profile while building my client base. Now it was time to go very public. "Michael," I said when I called him Friday morning, "I'm ready for that interview about my business. But I've got a story that's much bigger than you think, and it involves some very prominent local companies that haven't been entirely truthful about their financial situations." The interview took place the following Tuesday at my office, a renovated warehouse space in downtown Willowbrook that I'd been quietly expanding for 6 months. When Michael arrived with his photographer, I could see his surprise at the scale of my operation.
12 employees working at modern workstations, multiple conference rooms with clients joining via video calls from across the country, and a server room that looked more sophisticated than most banks in Clearwater Valley. This is not what I expected when we talked about interviewing a local digital marketing consultant, he admitted, looking around at the bustling office space. That's exactly the problem, I replied. People in this valley have very narrow ideas about what constitutes a real business. Let me show you what a real business actually looks like. I walked him through Nexus Digital Solutions' actual numbers, not the modest local operation my family had been dismissing, but the national powerhouse it had become. Verified revenue of $640,000 per month, clients in 47 states, partnerships with 3 Fortune 500 companies, a team that included formal executives from Google, Facebook, and Amazon who'd relocated to Clearwater Valley specifically to work for me. Michael's photographer was documenting everything, the client testimonials covering one wall, the industry awards I'd never bothered to display publicly, the expansion plans that would make Nexus Digital Solutions one of the largest employers in the valley within 2 years. But the real story emerged when I shared the documentation of my family's campaign to destroy my credibility while hiding their own business failures. So let me understand this correctly, Michael said, reviewing the court documents about Riverside Construction's financial problems. While Richard Blackstone was publicly questioning your business claims, his own company was facing bankruptcy? Not just questioning my claims, actively telling people I was mentally unstable, financially delusional, and possibly committing fraud, all while knowing his own business was hemorrhaging money and facing multiple lawsuits. The story Michael published the following week wasn't just a business profile. It was a comprehensive expose titled "The Empire They Tried to Hide: How Family Sabotage Nearly Destroyed Clearwater Valley's Most Successful Business." The article included verified financial documentation, interviews with my national clients, statements from employees I'd hired away from major tech companies, and a detailed timeline of my family's character assassination campaign, cross-referenced with Riverside Construction's mounting financial troubles. But the most damaging element was a sidebar story about Garrett's secret business activities. Michael had followed up on my evidence about Blackstone Development LLC and discovered that my brother had been systematically poaching Riverside's clients and employees while positioning himself as the concerned family member worried about my sister's mental health. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. By Thursday morning, my office phone was ringing constantly with calls from potential clients who'd read the article. Regional news stations wanted interviews. The State Business Development Council called to discuss featuring Nexus Digital Solutions in their annual report on emerging companies. But the most satisfying calls came from people who had been part of my family's character assassination campaign and now wanted to apologize. Harold Mitchum from Pinnacle Development called personally to express his regret about any misunderstandings and to inquire about digital marketing services for his company. Rebecca Martinez from Clearwater Marketing Solutions left a voicemail acknowledging that she had been misinformed about certain business matters and hoped we could discuss potential collaboration opportunities. The Women's Business Network that had shunned me after Mom's book club presentation sent a formal letter of apology and an invitation to speak at their next quarterly meeting about building successful enterprises in challenging family dynamics. Even Dr. Peterson called to apologize for the intervention suggestion and to clarify that she had been provided with incomplete and inaccurate information about my situation.
But the most dramatic response came from my former clients, who dropped me based on my family's lies. David Brennan from Pinnacle Athletic Center called within hours of the article's publication, practically begging to reinstate our contract. "Adrienne, I made a terrible mistake," he said, his voice heavy with embarrassment. "I let gossip override actual results. Your campaign performance was the best we'd ever seen, and I threw it away because of rumors. Can we please discuss resuming our partnership?"
By the end of the week, I'd received similar calls from every client I'd lost during my family's campaign. All of them wanted to restart their contracts, several with increased budgets to make up for the disruption they'd caused. The public revelation phase had accomplished something I hadn't fully expected. It had flipped the entire narrative of who was trustworthy and who wasn't in Clearwater Valley's business community. Instead of being seen as the delusional daughter of a successful construction magnate, I was now recognized as the visionary entrepreneur whose own family had tried to sabotage her success out of jealousy and insecurity. But the story wasn't over. The article had also attracted attention from beyond Clearwater Valley, including some very interested parties who saw opportunity in Riverside Construction's distressed situation. More importantly, it had forced my family into a position where their lies were no longer sustainable. When the local paper publishes verified financial documents showing your construction company is facing bankruptcy, while your daughter's hobby business generates more monthly revenue than your best annual quarters, denial becomes impossible. The phone call I'd been expecting finally came on Saturday morning. It was Dad, and for the first time in my adult life, his voice carried no trace of condescension or authority. "Adrienne, we need to talk, all of us, as a family. There are some things, some apologies that need to be made." But I wasn't interested in apologies anymore. The time for family conversations about respect and recognition had passed. Now we were going to have a very different kind of conversation about power, consequences, and what happens when people mistake kindness for weakness. The final confrontation was about to begin. The family meeting Dad had requested took place exactly 1 week after the Regional Business Journal article turned my private family betrayal into public knowledge. But this wasn't the sheepish apology session I might have expected. When I arrived at the Blackstone family home on Elmwood Drive, the same house where I'd been dismissed as a dreamer for over 22 years, I discovered that my family had prepared for war, not reconciliation. Garrett was already there, sitting at the dining room table with a stack of legal documents and his laptop open. Mom had positioned herself at Dad's right side, her expression a mixture of defiance and desperation. But it was Dad's appearance that shocked me most. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week, his usual commanding presence replaced by something that looked dangerously close to panic. "Adrienne," he began without preamble, "we need to discuss how to handle this situation before it destroys all of us." Destroys all of us? Not how to apologize for what we did to you, or how to make amends for the lies we spread. His concern was still entirely focused on protecting themselves from the consequences of their actions. "What situation would that be, Dad?" I asked, settling into the chair across from them. "The situation where your lies about my business were exposed, or the situation where everyone in Clearwater Valley, now knows Riverside Construction, is facing bankruptcy?" Garrett leaned forward, his voice carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "The situation where you've embarrassed this entire family with your vindicated media campaign. Do you have any idea what you've done to our reputation?" "Our reputation?" I almost laughed. "Garrett, I documented the truth. If that damaged your reputation, maybe the problem isn't with my documentation." "The problem," Mom interjected sharply, "is that you've aired private family business in the most public way possible. You've humiliated your father, damaged Garrett's new company before it even gets started, and made our entire family look like liars. You made yourselves look like liars by lying. I just provided the evidence." Dad slammed his hand on the table, a flash of his old authority returning. "Enough. What's done is done. We need to focus on damage control. Adrienne, you're going to call Michael Torres and tell him you want to issue a retraction. You're going to explain that there were misunderstandings, that family emotions got heated, and that both businesses are actually doing fine." I stared at him for a long moment. "You want me to lie to the press to cover up your lies to the community?" "I want you to fix what you broke," he exploded. "Do you understand what's happened since that article came out? 3 of my biggest clients have called to reassess their contractor relationships. The bank has accelerated the timeline on our loan review. Harold Mitchum publicly withdrew his recommendation letter for the municipal building project. And 2 of my employees have quit to work for other companies, including my project manager who took the Riverside Estates client with him. Clients are asking if Blackstone Development is connected to Riverside Construction's financial problems." So the truth had consequences. How unusual. Mom's composure finally cracked. This isn't about truth, Adrienne. This is about revenge. You wanted to destroy us, and you've succeeded. I wanted to protect myself from your character assassination campaign, I corrected. Everything that's happening to you now is the direct result of choices you made. You chose to lie about my business. You chose to spread rumors about my mental health. You chose to damage my professional relationships rather than admit you were wrong about my success. We were trying to help you, Dad shouted. We thought you were living in a fantasy world, making up numbers, setting yourself up for a devastating fall. We were trying to save you from embarrassment. For the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt something approaching sadness rather than anger. Dad, you never asked to see my actual numbers. You never asked to meet my clients or visit my office. You decided what you wanted to believe about my business, and then attacked anyone who contradicted that belief, including me. Garrett opened his laptop and turned it toward me. Fine, you want to talk about numbers? Let's talk about what your truth-telling has cost this family. Riverside Construction is now facing accelerated loan payments totaling $340,000. 3 major clients have terminated their contracts early, resulting in $180,000 in lost revenue. The bank has indicated they'll probably foreclose on the business assets within 60 days. He clicked to another screen. Blackstone Development has lost $280,000 in projected contracts because clients are concerned about association with financial instability. My business credit line was reduced from $100,000 to $25,000 because of family-related risk factors. And personally, Mom added, her voice trembling, we're probably going to lose the house. Your father guaranteed most of Riverside's debts with our personal assets. We're facing bankruptcy, Adrienne. Your parents are facing bankruptcy because you couldn't let go of a family disagreement. The room fell silent. They were staring at me with expressions that mixed desperation, anger, and something that looked like genuine hatred. In their minds, I had destroyed their lives not by exposing their lies, but by refusing to accept their lies gracefully. So what exactly are you asking me to do? I said finally. Dad pulled out a document I recognized as a draft press release. We're asking you to sign the statement saying that the Regional Business Journal article contained inaccuracies based on family miscommunications. We're asking you to publicly clarify that Riverside Construction is financially stable and that any reported problems were the result of temporary cash flow issues that have been resolved. You're asking me to lie. We're asking you to save this family, Mom whispered. I read through their draft statement. It was a masterpiece of misdirection that would essentially portray our entire conflict as a misunderstanding between family members who'd gotten their wires crossed about business matters. It would restore their credibility while making me look like a daughter who'd overreacted to normal family dynamics. And if I don't sign this, I asked. Garrett's expression hardened. Then we explore other options. Legal options. Defamation, business interference, intentional destruction of family assets. We've already consulted with Patterson and Associates about potential claims. There it was. Even facing the complete collapse of everything they'd built, even confronted with undeniable evidence of their lies and failures, they were threatening to sue me for telling the truth. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd grown up believing that family meant unconditional support and love. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were asking me to save them from the consequences of trying to destroy me. You know what the really tragic part of this is? I said, turning back to face them. 6 months ago, I would have helped you. If you'd come to me 6 months ago and admitted that Riverside was struggling, if you'd asked for business advice or financial assistance, I would have given it gladly. I might have even invested in modernizing their operations or helped you transition into new markets. Dad's eyes flickered with something that might have been regret. But that conversation was never possible, because admitting you needed help would have required admitting that the daughter you considered a failure might actually understand business better than you do.
Your egos were more important than your company's survival. I picked up their draft press release and held it up. And now, facing the total collapse of everything you've built, you're asking me to sacrifice my credibility to save yours. You're asking me to lie to protect people who spent months lying about me. I tore the document in half and let the pieces fall to the table. The answer is no. The silence that followed was absolute. Mom started crying quietly. Dad stared at the torn paper like it represented the death of his last hope. Garrett's face had gone completely white. "Then you've killed us," Dad said finally, his voice barely audible. "You've destroyed your own family." "No, Dad," I replied, walking toward the door. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided that maintaining your delusions was more important than supporting your daughter's success. I just documented what you'd already done." As I reached the doorway, I turned back one final time. When Riverside Construction files for bankruptcy, when you lose the house, when Garrett's new company fails because it was built on poached clients and borrowed credibility, remember this moment. Remember that you had a daughter who built a $47 million empire, and instead of celebrating her success, you chose to destroy it.
And remember that when you finally swallowed your pride enough to ask for help, you did it with threats and demands instead of apologies and accountability. I walked out of the house where I'd grown up, knowing I would probably never return. Behind me, I could hear Mom's crying intensify and Dad's voice, broken and desperate, calling my name. But I didn't turn around. The family that had tried to erase me was about to discover what life looked like when the person they'd erased was no longer there to save them from their own failures. 6 months after walking out of my childhood home for the last time, I stood in the conference room of Nexus Digital Solutions' new headquarters, looking out at the bustling downtown Willowbrook Street that had become the heart of what local media now called the Valley's Silicon District. The transformation wasn't just in the neighborhood, it was in me, in my business, and in the entire power structure of Clearwater Valley. The phone call I'd been expecting finally came at 3:47 p.m. on a gray February afternoon. Dad's name appeared on my screen, but when I answered, the voice that greeted me was barely recognizable as the commanding patriarch who'd once dismissed my computer hobby as fantasy. "Adrienne?" he said, his words slow and careful, like someone relearning how to speak after a stroke. "I know I have no right to call you. I know what I'm about to ask it's probably impossible. But I need help. Real help. Your mother and we're about to lose everything." I let the silence stretch between us, watching through my office window as employees from my rapidly expanding company headed home for the day. Nexus Digital Solutions now employed 47 people, occupied 3 floors of the Hartwell building, and had client contracts that would generate $11.2 million in revenue over the next 12 months. "What happened to Riverside Construction?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from the bankruptcy filings that had become public record 3 weeks ago. "It's gone," he said simply. "Complete asset liquidation. The house is gone too. Your mother and I are living in a rental apartment on Pine Street. Garrett's company folded 2 months ago. Turns out he'd been operating with clients who couldn't pay their bills either. He's moved back in with us." The irony was breathtaking. The construction magnate who'd built his empire on real work was now homeless, while his daughter's computer hobby had become one of the region's most successful businesses. "Dad," I said carefully, "why are you calling me?" The pause stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked with something I'd never heard from him before: genuine humility. "Because I was wrong. About everything. About your business, about what constitutes real success, about who you are and what you're capable of. I was wrong, and my pride destroyed everything I spent 30 years building. And what do you expect me to do with that information?" "I don't know," he whispered. "I guess I hoped maybe my daughter might be willing to help her father figure out how to start over. I know I don't deserve it. I know I destroyed any right to ask for your help when I tried to destroy your reputation, but I'm asking anyway."
For the first time since this entire ordeal began, I felt something other than anger or vindication when talking to my father. Not forgiveness, I wasn't ready for that yet, but something approaching curiosity about whether the man who'd raised me was still somewhere beneath the wreckage of his collapsed empire. "What kind of help are you looking for?" "I don't know," he repeated. "Maybe you could teach me about your business. Maybe there's some way a 62-year-old man who's only ever known construction could learn to work in whatever it is you've built here." The request was so unexpected, so completely contrary to everything Dad had ever said about digital marketing that I almost laughed. But there was something in his tone that stopped me, a brokenness that went beyond financial ruin to something deeper and more fundamental. "Dad, are you asking me for a job?" "I'm asking you to help me understand how to survive in a world where everything I thought I knew about business was wrong. I'm asking you to teach me how you built something that lasted while I was building something that crumbled the moment it faced real pressure." 3 days later, Dad walked into the Nexus Digital Solutions office for what I'd told him would be an informational interview. He arrived 20 minutes early, wearing a suit that probably had been expensive once, but now looked like something from a thrift store. His hair was grayer than I remembered, his shoulders less broad, his entire presence diminished in ways that went beyond physical appearance. I walked him through the office, explaining how digital marketing worked, introducing him to employees who were younger than both his children, but who commanded salaries higher than most executives in traditional Clearwater Valley businesses. He listened with the intensity of someone trying to decode a foreign language, asking questions that revealed just how little he'd understood about the industry he'd dismissed for so many years. "This person manages social media campaigns for restaurants across 12 states?" he asked, stopping at the workstation of our senior social media strategist. "She manages comprehensive digital presence strategies. Social media is just one component. She also handles content marketing, influencer partnerships, customer acquisition funnels, and conversion optimization across multiple platforms."
Dad nodded like he understood, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. This wasn't just a different type of business. It was a completely different way of thinking about commerce, customer relationships, and value creation. The tour concluded in my office, where I'd laid out some of the client success stories that had built Nexus Digital Solutions' reputation. A small family restaurant that we'd helped expand from 1 location to 8. A regional accounting firm that was now serving clients in 15 states. A boutique clothing manufacturer that had gone from struggling to survive to selling products internationally. Every one of these businesses was exactly where Riverside Construction ended up, I told him. Struggling with cash flow, losing clients to competitors, unable to adapt to changing market conditions. The difference is that they asked for help before it was too late. Dad studied the case studies with the same intensity he'd once brought to construction blueprints. What would it have looked like if Riverside had asked for help, hypothetically? Hypothetically, we would have built you a digital presence that showcased your 30 years of construction expertise. We would have created systems to generate qualified leads instead of forcing you to underbid on projects just to stay competitive. We would have helped you build relationships with clients across the region instead of being limited to word-of-mouth referrals in Clearwater Valley. I pulled up a mock-up I'd actually created months earlier, before everything fell apart, a comprehensive digital strategy for Riverside Construction that could have positioned them as the premier commercial contractor across 3 counties. This strategy could have increased your annual revenue by 40%, while improving your profit margins by at least 25%. Instead of underbidding projects and hoping to make money on change orders, you would have been attracting clients who valued quality over lowest price. Dad stared at the presentation for a long time. How long would this have taken to implement? 6 months for full deployment, you would have started seeing results within 60 days. The silence stretched between us. Outside my office window, the sun was setting over downtown Willowbrook, casting long shadows across the streets where my father had once driven his construction trucks, back when he'd been the local business success story, and I'd been the daughter with impossible dreams. "Adrienne," he said finally,
I need you to know that I understand what I cost both of us. I cost you months of pain and professional damage that you didn't deserve. And I cost our family the chance to build something together that could have been bigger than either of our individual businesses. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I saw him not as the patriarch who'd always had all the answers, but as a man who'd finally realized how many questions he'd never thought to ask. I can't undo what I did to you. I can't bring back Riverside Construction. But if you're willing to teach me, I'd like to learn how to think about business the way you do. Not because I deserve the chance, but because maybe I can become the kind of father who supports his daughter's success instead of sabotaging it. The conversation that followed lasted until nearly midnight. We talked about digital marketing, about the difference between traditional and modern business models, about the mistake of confusing activity with productivity. But mostly, we talked about the cost of pride and the price of learning difficult lessons too late. I didn't offer Dad a job that night. He wasn't ready for that, and frankly, neither was I. But I did offer him something else, a consulting arrangement where he could learn digital business strategies while helping me understand how to work with traditional industries that were struggling to adapt to modern market conditions. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't a return to the family dynamics that had nearly destroyed both of us. It was something entirely new, a professional relationship between two business people who happened to share DNA, built on mutual respect rather than assumed loyalty. 6 months later, Dad had become one of our most effective consultants for traditional businesses seeking digital transformation. He understood their resistance to change because he'd lived it. He could translate digital marketing concepts into language that made sense to people who'd built their careers on tangible, physical work. And slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding something that looked like a family relationship. Not based on the old hierarchies and assumptions, but on the foundation of professional respect and genuine understanding of each other's capabilities. The daughter who'd been told she'd never measure up to her brother had built an empire that dwarfed anything the Blackstone family had ever achieved. But more importantly, she'd proven that sometimes the greatest success comes not from destroying the people who doubt you, but from building something so undeniably valuable that even your harshest critics eventually ask to learn from your example. The computer hobby had become a legacy, and finally, my family was ready to be part of building it instead of tearing it down.